If you're new to wood turning, becoming more confident with your scroll chuck can be invaluable. Today, we're going to explore several methods of using our scroll chuck, including the pros and cons of each. I'll meet you at the lathe. Using a scroll chuck at your lathe gives you a ton of flexibility in how we hold work pieces onto our lathe so we can work on them. But for the most part, we're going to use two different methods. We're either going to form a tenon where the chuck grabs onto the outside of this part, or we're going to use a recess like this where the jaws go inside and expand out. So today we're going to explore both of these methods and the pros and cons of each. One of the benefits of tenons, and one of the reasons I used it on this bowl, is I started this bowl when it was very wet. It's close to dry now, but I know that this tenon is no longer round. So what I'll be able to do using that tenon is to get this round again, and then I'll be able to latch back onto this and turn the rest of the bowl. So that's one advantage of using a tenon. Another thing that I like about tenons is I can vary the size. I have several different jaws for my scroll chuck. And then I can also use the material for this tenon to form the foot. So I'll turn most of the tenon away at the very end when I'm finished on the bowl, and I can resize this material to form a foot on the bottom of my bowl. Now, of course, one of the downsides of using a tenon is most of the time you have that tenon on here, and once we're done with the rest of the bowl, we have to reverse mount it to the lathe using some method and turn away the tenon. So that can be a disadvantage also. My favorite thing about using a recess is that I don't have to go back later and reverse mount the bowl to finish the bottom. Because I'm taking my chuck and I've got my jaws and it goes on the inside of this little recess and expands outward to hold onto the bowl, I can finish the bottom of the bowl all at one time, so I don't have to reverse mount it, and that's why I chose to use the recess for this piece. Now let's get a bowl blank mounted in the lathe and take a look at cutting a tenon and a recess. The first thing we want to do to get a tenon on this bowl blank is to mark out where our tenon's going to be and identify the diameter. In this case, I want my tenon to be 3.5 inches, so I'm going to measure over from center 1 3/4 inches. Just going to put a mark here, and then we'll just connect that line all the way around. Now that we know where we want our tenon, we're just going to remove the material outside of that to form that shape. There's two ways we can make this cut, and we'll probably use both before we're done. We can come in here from the outside and get a bevel supported, get our cut started. Get our bevel supported cut out here on the outside. Ultimately, I want the thickness of the tenon to be a little over 1/4 inch. So here we can just cut in. We're just going to cut right into that line. There we go. We're going to remove most of the material that we need to with our bowl gouge. You can also use a scraping motion like that. It just depends on what is working for that piece that day. Alright, so we've got our tenon formed for the most part, so what I want to do is just go right down here into the bottom, pull that off just a little bit. I want to flatten that. Here are the chuck jaws that I'm going to be using on this piece. And maybe you can see, hopefully you can see, there's a slight dovetail shape. It's a little bit wider down here at the bottom than it is at the top. So what I want to do is put a little angle from this edge down into this pocket, which will give my jaws a little better grip and holding power, because it kind of locks it into place. I've got a little bit of a mechanical advantage there with basically it's a dovetail shape, just like you would have with building drawers or something like that. To get that dovetail shape on, what I like to do is use my skew chisel. And I'm just going to come in here with my skew chisel, using it as a scraper, and we're just going to start at this point down here in the bottom and gradually cut in using it like a scraper until the edge of our skew chisel is kind of riding here on this edge. So I'm going to form a tenon or a dovetail shape on my tenon. That'll give me a little more holding power. All right, so now I've got my dovetail shape. Hopefully you can see that. And then once I've got that, I also want to make sure that this face is really flat. So I just take, with the skew chisel also, I just flatten that right there very briefly. We want a flat surface here on the very bottom of our bowl where the jaws are going to register, and that'll make sure everything's kind of perpendicular. So I've got a dovetail here on my tenon and a nice flat spot down here on the bottom of the bowl. So now we've got our tenon formed, and we'll be ready to flip this around when it's time to start hollowing this bowl. Let's create a recess that we can hold in our 4-jaw chuck on this project. Now in this case, this is a segmented project, so I've only got the base in the lathe right now. So I'm going to flatten the bottom just like we did with the tenon. So let's start there. When we're marking for our recess, there's a couple different points that we need to pay attention to. First is the inside diameter of our recess. In this case, I want that inside to be 2 1/4 inches. So I'm going to measure over here 1 1/8 inches. So I'm just going to put a mark here at 1 1/8 inches. And then I want about 1/2 inch for the base of the bowl. So from the center, we've marked over 1 1/8 inches, and that'll get us the diameter for the recess, and then the outside of the foot of our bowl is at about 1 5/8 inches. In the smaller diameter, we'll cut in our recess, and then out here at the foot, we'll start by removing some material outside of the foot of our bowl, about 1/8 of an inch or so, and that'll form the foot, and then we'll work back into the middle on our recess. With the tailstock out of the way, we're going to take our parting tool and establish this diameter for our recess. Now I'm going to use my small 1/4 inch bowl gouge, and we'll just remove this material here in the center of our recess. With that material out of the center, I'm going to use my skew chisel as a scraper. And we're just going to clean up the bottom, make sure this is nice and flat, make sure the foot's nice and flat. And we're going to come in here and add a little bit of a dovetail shape on the inside of our recess as well. That dovetail's it's going to be shaped like my jaws. They've got a little flare out on the end, and that'll just help us grip using that recess. And now our recess is ready to use. Just like anything else in wood turning, the more you practice, the better you're going to get. In no time, you'll find your favorite way of using tenons and using recesses. If you want to see how I take basically firewood and turn it into a bowl, you can find that video here, and I'll see you there.